Hello and welcome to Blueprints Academy. I hope you all are doing very well. Today's video we will be talking about what are the differences between SQS, Kinesis and SNS and why you should use one over the another. I always used to think why we can't use SNS in place of SQS or vice versa. Or maybe why not use Kinesis as SQS or SNS? In the end they all can store events, right? All can have targets, all applications can push events to either of these services, then why one over another? There must be a reason why AWS created these different services and people often use them for different use cases, isn't it? And that's exactly why I created this video. So to understand and summarize why we can't use one in place of another and where we should use what, especially in terms of scalability, consistency and high throughput. So without further ado, let's get started. But before that, if you did not yet subscribe to this channel, then do it right now. And trust me, you won't regret it. Let's start with requirements. Usually we start thinking about a technology only after getting certain requirements, right? And we try to fit each service inside each requirement, and we will eventually understand why one cannot fit in one use case and other way around. So the requirement one. Imagine we would like to have a place to store events generated by our front-end applications. These could be mobile applications or websites or any platform. These events will be later consumed by some different applications. So we need to think where we can store these events. We are working in an event-driven architecture, for instance. Please try to think which service can we use to store these events given that we only have these three options: SNS, Kinesis or SQS. Please pause this video and think a little bit about it and then resume. Here we actually have just two options which are Kinesis and SQS. So of course both can store the events, right? But wait, why not SNS? So SNS cannot store events. Pay attention to this. SNS cannot store events. The events will be delivered to subscribers as soon as they arrive, which means SNS works in a push mechanism, not as opposed to the other two services which work in pull mechanism. So we cannot actually use SNS for this use case because we would like to store the event for certain time. And with SNS, you cannot store the event. So the moment events are pushed to SNS, they would immediately be forwarded to the respective subscribers. I mean the targets or whatever you would like to say. So SNS works with push mechanism. Events won't be stored but will be delivered to subscribers. Example Slack, email or whatever configuration that you set while creating the SNS. Thus named as notification service, it's obvious, right? Because it is mostly used for the notification services. So here if you see, we already have a problem with SNS, right? So if we are building a streaming system, for instance, we cannot really use SNS. But yes, if we have to build a messaging system, then we can surely use SNS and possibly ignore other two right away. So at this moment with this requirement, we have only two options, which is AWS Kinesis and AWS SQS. Now let's talk about our second requirement. Multiple consumers would like to consume these messages simultaneously. Remember, simultaneously. Now let's understand how each service will behave in this case. So for AWS Kinesis, we can of course store events. These events then later be available to be consumed by n number of consumers. So Kinesis works perfectly for this requirement. What about SQS? So SQS can also store events, and those events will later be again available for the consumers to be consumed. But SQS also gives one more advantage, and which is about hiding the messages. So for instance, let's say you have a message in SQS and you would like to hide this message from other consumers if it is being consumed by one consumer. So if you have this specific requirement that you would like to share this event or let this event to be consumed by only one consumer, then you can think about SQS. So SQS has a property called visibility timeout, and by playing with this configuration, you can let SQS know whether or not to hide the event. So if you have this particular requirement, then you can see that SQS is the thing to go with, not the Kinesis. And of course, we cannot use SNS in this case because we cannot store the events, so they would not be available for the consumers. Let's now talk about our requirement 3. So here we would like to reprocess the event or replay the event in case of failure or delay in the events. Now let's see which services can provide this functionality. So with AWS Kinesis, we can easily achieve that using something called sequence number. So each event comes with a sequence number, or I should say each event is stored in Kinesis with a sequence number. So in case of failure or in case of reprocessing of the event, we can rely on sequence number to reprocess the event. In AWS SQS, it is not straightforward. So with AWS SQS, we can create two kind of queues. One is standard, another one is FIFO, which is first in, first out. So if we even go with FIFO, we can somehow guarantee the ordering, but still it's not that convenient to reprocess the event. So in case of reprocessing of the event, we should always go with Kinesis. And of course, we cannot use SNS as we already discussed for these reasons. So in case of reprocessing, we should rely with AWS Kinesis. And here we can see that AWS Kinesis is actually winning based on our use case, of course. What is requirement 4? So this is actually with respect to scaling of the system. Let's say we would like to scale and process more than 10 events in parallel at a time. Now let's see how these services will behave. So in case of AWS Kinesis, we can easily do this. Actually, AWS Kinesis is meant for this purpose. Sorry. So how we can do this? So we increase the number of shard. The more shard we have on the Kinesis data stream, the more consumers can consume in parallel from that particular stream. It's simple. Each shard can process 2000 event per second, which is a lot. With AWS SQS, it is not possible because in single request, you can get at max 10 event per batch. So we are kind of limited here. SNS is of course not an option, obviously. Sorry. So in this case, we have clearly AWS Kinesis as the one that we should go with in case of scalability and if we are thinking of an scalable system. Let's now briefly compare what we have discussed so far and let's see where which service fits in. So in case of Kinesis, think Kinesis as a streaming service. It's like a log, where you keep the events even after consuming them. So you want to have some kind of retention, as opposed to SQS where you would delete the event after consumption. You can rely on ordering when you are using Kinesis, but you cannot rely on ordering when you are using SQS. You can somewhat rely using FIFO, but it has a very low throughput. So still, in case of ordering, always use Kinesis. Reprocessing or replay of the event. As discussed, we can do reprocessing and replay of the event using sequence number, which is definitely not possible in AWS SQS. In terms of scalability, AWS Kinesis is highly scalable. Where you increase the shard, you get the more scalability, more parallelism, and more consumers can read. Whereas with AWS SQS, only max 10 events per request can be consumed, which is kind of a limitation. Throughput. So throughput is controlled by you via shards. More shard, more throughput. As opposed to SQS, where throughput is controlled by AWS internally by itself. It also provides high throughput, but only in scenarios where we are building a system where we don't actually want to have a streaming platform, but more like a queuing system. In terms of retention, so with AWS Kinesis, we can retain the event max for 1 year, as opposed to SQS, where the retention period is very minimal, which is max 14 days. So these are the main points that we discuss, and this is the brief comparison between AWS Kinesis and AWS SQS. So keep in mind your requirement and use case, and choose the service which best suits you. At last, let's not forget about AWS SNS, because this is also the part of the video, right? So AWS SNS turns out to have a specific role, right? It is more of a notification service which works like a push mechanism, as I mentioned before. So in case of we want to build a system where we want to provide instant reaction on events like email, alerts, notifications, we would go with SNS. It is push based system where messages are pushed and not pulled. So we already discussed this. So the moment event or message arrives in SNS, it is delivered to the targets. There is no retention concept here. Publish to multiple services, that is pub sub model, and we can publish to n number of services. We can even redirect messages to SQS, Lambda, Kinesis, HTTP endpoints, or many other external integrations. So AWS SNS is very different compared to SQS and Kinesis. SQS and Kinesis are somewhat related in terms of how they manage the events, but still they have the clear reason why they are being built differently and where we should use what. I hope you like this video, and if you did, please like the video and share it with your friends. And I hope it will help you decide on what service you want to use in your next architecture. Until then, have a good day, good evening, good afternoon, or whatever, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.